Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to you today to HR Zone's online event. The topic we're going to be talking about today, people have been speaking about for a long time in quite uncertain terms, and it's only now that we're getting the research and the data in a common language so we can talk about it in a really meaningful way. That topic is connecting employee engagement and the customer experience and working out where they align and how we can create value on both sides by aligning results from both sides and just connecting those two key parts of an organizational tree, the customer, the employee. This is really about people and adding value through people. So that's the topic today. It's very, very interesting, and it's something that we're going to see more of as organizations try to derive greater competitive advantage from their people. You'll be seeing the webinar live on the left-hand side of your screen. On the right-hand side, you'll have your chat box. This chat box you can use throughout the online event to put in questions, to put in thoughts, to respond to comments that our panelists are saying, and we'll be picking those up throughout if they come through at a pertinent time to a point, or we'll be picking them up at the end for the live Q&A, where we'll be putting questions to our expert panel. And our expert panel today are Paul Barnes from Questback, who provide feedback solutions for customers and employees, and Ben Kent from Meridian West, who are an insight-led consultancy. Now, these guys are both in the same room, so guys, do jump in if you want to make points in each other's presentations. That's absolutely fine. Let's keep it casual and just get a really nice discussion going on this crucial topic, and something that will become much more important in the future. On that note, I will pass across to Paul, who's going to talk on whether engagement and customer experience are really two sides of the same coin. Paul, over to you.
Great. Okay, thank you, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. So as Jamie said, really, I think this is a topic that's been talked around for a while, and we've had a lot of discussions with customers and prospects on it, particularly over through this year, I guess we'd say. And off the back of that, we decided to do some primary research on it through the summer, and we published a white paper, a research document, which you're all very welcome to get a copy of. It's on our website. And today I wanted to start by pulling out partly some of the background thinking to this, so just validating why it should make sense. And then I want to share 3 or 4 points of research out of it and look at the overall analysis that we found, but also drill into some of the detail behind it, some of the stories and the root causes behind the results that we found. So that's what I'll do. I'm going to ask you, so here's some immediate warning, I'm going to ask for some audience participation in this. We have a poll which we're going to run with Jamie's help, and I'll just ask you to be thinking about how this applies to your organization, and we can have a bit of a discussion and maybe take that into the questions later. Okay, so I want to start with this and take you back to the 90s. One of the key documents or bits of research or thinking that came out of Harvard in this area in the 90s was a thing called the service profit chain, or the service to profit chain. And many of you will have come across it. It became one of the standard things that was taught on MBA courses, and it drove a lot of business thinking in the 90s, but we do seem to have lost sight of it a little bit. It's really common sense if you look through the principle that if you get the internal structures, internal services and right in your business and how it works, that's going to make it a productive, employable, enjoyable place to work for employees, and that in turn is going to drive the service that they're able to provide customers, and therefore customer satisfaction, customer loyalty, and as we all know, that feeds into revenue growth and profitability. So when you look at it this way, it's common sense. And it's causal as well. You can see there is a direct impact between employee engagement and how that affects on productivity and customer satisfaction. So this isn't anything new, really. That's the point I'm trying to make with this. It's been around for some time, and it has been taken on and developed. There's another model called the people to profit chain, which you may have come across, and I think it's worth just going back and validating that. But if you want to take it anecdotally and look at that more of an emotional side, maybe there's plenty of support from this for business leaders. The quote you can see there from Richard Branson is one that you see quite a lot, and again it picks out this causal relationship. How you treat employees directly impacts how they treat your customers. So therefore, if you want to have an impact on how your customer experience works, the key way you're going to do that is to get employee engagement right and be considering that. So again, pretty much supporting that common sense view. And one more quote, Jack Welch. I think there's a couple of things I really like about this. GE are known for their simplicity. I saw a presentation, plenary speech done at HR Vision last week by GE, and how they're simplifying their HR organization. They've been consistently good at this over the years. And when you pull out those three things that Jack Welch focuses on, two of them are employee engagement and customer satisfaction. And whilst within that quote he's not drilling into specifically linking them, clearly if those are the three metrics that matter most and you're going to be having those on a dashboard, you have to understand the interrelationship between them. And I think it's quite refreshing to look at this kind of view in the world of big data we're in at the moment. I see so many organizations who are struggling with the volume of data that they have and getting lost in KPIs and metrics and are unable to really focus on the things that make a difference. So from that point of view, I think it's great to see this kind of simplicity in play. So as I gave you warning before, we're going to start, and I'm just like you to read this question and give us a bit of feedback about where your organization is, and feel free to keep it simple, just a yes or no if you like. If you have some more points you'd like to throw into that, so some of the benefits that you've seen from doing it or that you'd like to achieve from doing it, some of the barriers or frustrations that maybe you've come across when trying to address this issue, any detail that brings it to life, then please feel free to put that on there as well. And then we'll come back to a discussion on that in a few slides' time. Okay, so let's move on and let me share with you some of the research findings that came out of this piece of work. Because you would think that given the common sense nature of this and the perhaps obvious benefits in place, we'd all be on top of it. But unfortunately, that seems not to be the case. So when we asked this question to the respondents, which were all UK based, a range of sizes of companies, what we found was that there was very few who have full integration of employee engagement and customer satisfaction data, only 5%. It's clearly an issue in that 31% have part integration, and I think this is a really worthwhile number to drill into in a bit more detail. When you look at this point here and how people are trying to partly integrate these two topics, the challenge is they're trying to do it mostly at a reporting level. So they're taking the outputs of work that's been done on employee engagement initiatives and on customer satisfaction initiatives and trying to link them together at the output stage. And that's when we got into some of the stories and talked to people here, they find it quite difficult and quite frustrating. And it makes sense if you think about it, because it's about the questions you ask. And if you don't consider the linkage when you're structuring the questions, you lose the ability to join it up. So just as an example, one that stood out for me was if you're asking a question set to employees about do they have all the tools that they need to do their job, that's a very valid employee engagement kind of question. But if you're not thinking about the customer side of it and you don't drill into that question and segment out the tools that directly affect ability to support customers versus internal, then you lose the ability to link that question down the line. And similarly, if you're asking customer sat questions and you're asking a broad question around the customer experience you had from the staff that you met in store or branch or whatever it was, or over a call or a web chat session, if you don't think down the line when you're structuring that question, you'll make it generic and you won't drill into perhaps even splitting it as crudely as the knowledge of the staff versus the behavior of the staff. But just by asking that question in a bit more detail on the customer side, you start to be able to understand whether the root cause issues are to do with knowledge and therefore training and tool sets that are there versus behavior, which is much more about engagement, motivation, these kinds of things. So that's what we found with that partly integrated view, is it's causing quite a lot of frustration because it's integrated too far downstream. The other number that I thought was interesting here is the 26% of people planning to do something on this within the next 18 months. So, clearly this is a hot topic at the moment, which is perhaps no great surprise. So the next point we looked at here was around benefits, and this was talking predominantly to the people who'd done some kind of integration, whether it's full or partial, and looking at why they were doing it. And the top one was about customer experience. It was being driven by customer experience, and that's, again, common sense given the causal nature of it. If you're looking, the fact that employee engagement impacts on customer experience, if you're trying to impact or affect customer experience, that would be a logical prime driver. And the kinds of things that were coming out of this and that people were getting as benefits, again, a small example was around wait time. So wait time, point of sale in store or counter time in branch, and the fact that if you're trying to understand the root cause of that by linking together the employee engagement data with the customer service, it became clear in some cases that, for instance, the primary or the causal factor of the wait time was actually to do with a system issue or to do with scheduling of staff, and that causal data comes out of the employee engagement side of it, linked into the customer experience, but the core benefit is clearly around customer experience. The second one was on motivation and engagement of employees, and that's logical. It's about being listened to. I do think there's a big change at the moment in employee engagement per se, and there's a move away from the sort of structured annual survey into more granular questioning and more granular insight and engagement of employees. So I think that kind of ties in with this here. I wasn't too surprised to see that. The third one I think is really interesting, and getting insight that linked to business objectives. And this, I think, is all about maturity and maturity of how businesses work with insight. There's been a lot of focus over the past few years, perhaps, around indicator metrics. So an engagement score on the employee engagement side of it, or perhaps NPS or CSAT or customer effort score on the CX side. And I think there's a general move of increasing maturity in the market at the moment, and people moving away from that to say, well, those are useful measures, but they're not really the key numbers. What we need to be looking at is average order sizes, employee retention, sales, profits, actual business metrics rather than indicators. And I think it was the fact that that's a key benefit that people see in this kind of linkage underpins that. A couple of other ones to pull out on there. The linking CX to specific employees, I think, is really really an important one. To be able to see as an employee the impact of your own work on customers and positive feedback that's coming back from that, I think, is really valuable. And we've got some interesting examples of people using that in sort of call center type environments, but also some really quite fundamental ones. We have a large global bank that we've worked with who now have 40% of the compensation of their commercial account managers linked to the feedback scores that are coming out of the specific accounts that they manage. So they've got this deep linkage in place between customer feedback and employees, and using that to drive commission. So I think there's some interesting elements of that. And finally, the other one I'd pull out is the gaining greater insight into customer behavior. And this one, I think, over time will become bigger. There's a whole swathe of customers who simply won't give you feedback, and that's partly because of who they are, and partly because of this increasing survey saturation that's out there now. You can't really do anything without getting asked for a survey. And while some people won't respond to that, they will share their views with your staff in when they're in a personal interaction with them, and being able to capture that voice of the non-responder can be really valuable within a customer experience program. And I mean, just before we move on, the last point there, reducing research costs. I mean, clearly this isn't a cost-driven issue. And I think you can see that also on this slide here that we looked at about what the barriers are, what's holding us back. And you can see the bottom one, too costly. None of this is really about cost barriers. It's much more strategic than that, I think. It was really interesting to see the top factor is that people just haven't considered it. And again, that's a maturity issue, I think, about where we are with this issue. But a couple of things to pull out on the barriers. One is technology is clearly a problem, and I think that's a legacy issue. People have built up, or companies have built up silos here. So there'll be an employee engagement initiative which maybe runs with an outsourced consultancy. There may be a number of market research programs ongoing, and then there's a voice of customer system in place. And the challenge is that all of those are separate bits of technology, and bringing them together in one isn't really an issue from a technology point of view as such, but making the migration is a challenge. Moving away from those legacy silos can be painful. The third point there around departmental issues and people working together, I'm going to pick up on the next slide. But the other one, points 4 and 5 around employee engagement data not being able to link, and then the frequency of the cycles being different, I think goes back to those frustrations I talked about before with partial integration, where you have to have the question sets the same. And unfortunately, I think there's a bit of dogma at play here. On the customer experience side, I think there is people being a bit too zealous and a bit too wedded to some of those benchmark indicators like NPS. And you have to move on from those. You have to, that they're useful, but they're not sufficient. And I think there is a need to get into broader questions about that. And the same on the HR side, I think, where there's perhaps a culture that's very locked into benchmarks, to annual surveys, standard question sets that drive that benchmarking, and a reluctance to move away from that. But it just has to, that's something that has to be faced up to, I think. If you're going to address how these issues can link, you do need to be more sophisticated in the questioning. And an example would be opening a new store or launching a new product. The value of being able to talk to a customer set who visited that store or used that product, as well as the employees who were involved in making that transaction for the business, and ask them the same set of questions and feed that back to a line of business owner or a store manager, is incredibly valuable. But it doesn't necessitate a move away from the rigidity of some of these questioning approaches on both sides of the operation, I think. Okay, and final one before we come back to the poll results was this question of ownership. So, where does it sit? Who owns it? How do we deal with this structural issue? And I think the message is clear, which is it needs to be a combination. It can't be just the HR department or just the CX marketing department. And you can see that in the stats there. There's less than a third are doing it that way. For most people, it's either a new function of central insight or a cross-functional team that's set up bringing both sides together. And there's just a real clear message that has to be the way to address this to make it work. And that can be a challenge for some organizations, but it's one that I think needs to be faced up to. So just a couple of minutes before I hand over to Ben. Jamie, do you want to jump back in? Has there been anything interesting that you found on the poll results so far?
Absolutely. So I'll come to those in a sec. I just want to make a few points from your presentation. So firstly, on that final slide, I completely agree, and I think it's pretty clear that this type of initiative is the new way of thinking, and the new way of thinking that employees deliver the experience to customers, and so to get that customer experience, you really need to focus on the employees. So it can't really just be the HR department, just like employee engagement can't really be just an HR initiative. It has to be an organizational initiative that everyone's bought into. I see this very much the same way. And just coming back to focusing on the specific employees, I think that's a really important point. There's an HR director I was talking to a couple of weeks ago who, really sees the value in what you can get when you start combining customer experience, employee engagement, and then you can ask questions like, what's my most profitable time of day? Where's my most profitable location, and then which employee is most profitable at these times, which one provides the best customer experience at these times, and you can get a load of learnings and a load of new insight into how you can optimize those environments from both an employee point of view and also a customer point of view. And I think that's where this approach really comes into its own. Very, very important. We've actually just had a comment from Jane who says that this approach needs to be a partnership, and she's been saying it in her company for a long time. I don't think that's surprising. With this new approach, it is quite a paradigm shift, and it's really important. And actually, quite a few of the poll results have said that people want to get into this. They find it interesting, and it's something that they clearly see the value in. And Paul, I know we are agreed on this. We were talking about it earlier, that this idea isn't new. It's just a new way of doing it. People know that employees deliver the customer experience, and the customer experience is what's going to become really important in the new world, where people, spread ideas on social media, and customers are much more savvy about what products are best. So I think that's a really important comment from Jane as well. And then we've got some stuff around the business case as well. So uncertainty about how to build the business case for this new approach. Precisely the same problem we've seen with employee engagement. That's now coming into its own. But I do think the business case, that's come up a couple of times. That's obviously an issue there. Comment from Dan. Fair point, Dan. Profitable employees, controversial. I agree with you. I think there's a better way of saying it, and a better way of encouraging employees to deliver the right customer experience, and that leads to profit. So it's the outcome rather than the input. So completely agree. And just a few other comments around people saying that they're interested, but there are operational problems. Paul, I know you touched on that around the technology and just the way you do this, the way you tackle this approach. Do those comments surprise you, Paul?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, Jamie. The business case one is really interesting, and I'm not surprised that came up. It is a challenge because it's quite. It often involves looking at data in different ways than you have done before within the organisation, but it can be done. We've got we do a lot of work in the financial services sector. We've got a big insurer where recently they've mapped in the NPS scores to employee engagement, and been able to prove the causal link there. And so within the customer experience program, engagement is now a key part. And another financial company we work with who've actually linked it through to revenue, to be able to look at the teams who take the action plans coming out of the engagement activities that relate to customers, and when they implement those action plans, there was a plus 20% revenue performance from those teams. So I think it helps where you've got that kind of team environment, where you've got comparable branches or stores or areas or regions or line of business, and you can be smart with the data and help to bring out the causality. That can help. But we certainly do a lot of work on business case, and unfortunately there isn't an easy answer. You do just have to take a deep breath and dive into the data. Good, thank you, Jamie. So I just wanted to close with one slide here, which is some final thoughts. And the overriding thing is everyone wins in this approach. There are benefits to customers. They're going to get their issues raised faster, raised more clearly, and the root cause, that's the really important phrase, I think, is root cause identified, and in a way which it can be actioned. From an employee point of view, as you said, Jamie, some of these personal ownership issues and real meaningful input into development plans is a clear benefit. And finally, for the business, things like the voice of the non-responder and just the early warning signs and helping drive better decision making, and ultimately going all the way back to where I started with the service to profit chain and the right hand side with revenue and sales. So that was it. That's me done. I'm conscious I have spoken quite a lot about theory here, and I think the value of the next segment is to hand over to Ben, who's got some real world examples here, and we can put a bit of practice onto the theory. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks a lot, Paul. I really agree with what's been said today, and I was going to talk through a case study of a business I'm involved with, of basically how we integrated employee feedback, customer feedback. We also linked that with financial client profitability data, and what has made me is a real fan of this approach. I should explain a bit about the case study. So I have sort of two hats, if you like. I'm a director of Meridian West. I set up a research business, and we focus on professional services and financial services sectors. But I'm also a non-exec director of our family firm, which is a builder's merchant called Kent Blacksall. And I was going to focus on Kent Blacksall as the kind of case study, talk around how we use customer research, link to it with employee research, and then create the story of the successes and the pitfalls as we had on the way. So a bit about KB's. It's a builder's merchant. We're based in East Anglia. Main office is in Colchester, and we've been going 175 years. So we had our anniversary last year. Princess Anne visited our main site in Colchester. We also had Nick Clegg. But we were also facing, just at that time of the anniversary, really difficult market conditions. And our profits were, well, we'd gone into loss, and it felt like we were sort of struggling with a culture which was very much driven by the finance department, the operations department. When I sat on the board, we hardly ever discussed HR issues or customer issues. We were inundated with finance data. And we believed that we were really good to our employees and they were very loyal, and we believed that customers really liked us. But I had my kind of market research hat on. I said, well, do we actually have evidence for that? And so I managed to persuade the board to do a customer survey to begin with. Went quite softly, but managed to get sign-off on it. And we did that back in 2012. And it went really well. So we did it online. We got 607 responses, which was a pretty big chunk of the customer base, and I think represented a third of our total revenue. And when you looked at it superficially, it looked pretty good. 68% said that KBs were good, very good, or outstanding. But I spent a bit of time digging around and looking behind that, and there were some quite worrying comments. And this is one of the strongest. So I've been using Kent Blacksall for the last 35 years, and I've always found it to be brilliant until the last few years. The helpfulness of staff has really gone downhill, and it is can't be bothered attitude. And it wasn't just him. I know this is not just my opinion, as many in the business are now going elsewhere. So this, I think, was the kick up the backside that we needed, really. Because what it showed is that our kind of view that we were great at customer, great at employee, was really showing that this was not always the case. And also, it was having an impact on our business. So what was interesting about this is exactly to Paul's point. We could see the symptoms, but we couldn't see the cause. The symptoms were kind of unhelpful staff. We also had symptoms like people weren't picking up the phone, and also that people were, which was catastrophic from a profitability perspective because we were missing orders. We were also finding that we were sending trucks all across East Anglia at significant expense and getting the deliveries wrong. That annoyed the builder who had a house to build. It was also hugely expensive because we then had to send another truck back at significant expense. So that was our business case, if you like. But then he wanted to say, okay, we need to figure out what's underlying all of this. So we then persuaded the board to do an employee survey. And this was quite a sensitive time, actually, because we really were facing a difficult financial situation. We had a load of other kind of things on our top of our agenda. So it was a bit of a struggle to say, look, we really need to focus on it. And it took a lot of pushing at the board. But we did it. And to some extent, this was more alarming than the customer survey, because what it showed is that there was a lot of kind of residual warmth to the family firm, but it was a bit like a kind of slightly jaded marriage, that they'd kind of fallen out of love with us, and they were frustrated actually they couldn't do a better job for their customers. So staff didn't feel part of the company. Communication was poor, and what it showed actually is that all the customer service issues actually came back to pretty much one issue, which was internal communication. So we were basically the business was broken up into little tribes. We had Colchester site, didn't talk to the other smaller branches. Senior management felt they were one tribe and weren't getting through to people on the front line. People in finance weren't talking to people on the front line. It was a series of tribes and no one was talking to each other. So I think we found the cause of a lot of our difficulty. This was the reason why people didn't feel motivated. This is the reason why we're delivering the wrong stuff to people. It's because people weren't talking. And with that information, we essentially went on a change program, and this was actually where the research itself was relatively straightforward to do. And we did align, to Paul's point, we did align the questions. So we made sure that the employee survey focused on how to improve the client experience. To be honest, it was pretty easy to do. It was the change which took a bit of time. So one thing we did is we had a new commercial director, a guy called Ron, who was awesome. And what he did is he took the customer survey data and integrated it with the profitability data we had. And so we could tell for each customer how satisfied they were, which competitors they used, what share of wallet we had, and then we could figure out, okay, how much we'd sold them over the last few years. And then we took that, integrated it into an account plan, gave it to the sales reps, and got them on the road. And had a big impact. So we had 165 follow-ups, and it immediately resulted in new sales. And we're a £30 million business, but we've projected to add another £600,000 in new sales just off this initiative. So that's your business case. The second thing we did is we thought, okay, how do we get people motivated? How do we get board commitment to this? So we created a customer charter which said, okay, let's establish some target KPIs. So the board committed to this, and we went public. We put this in our external newsletter, and we said, okay, we want 90% of our customers to rate us as very good or outstanding, which is quite a big leap from, I think, the 68%. And we broke down what that meant into 3 simple things. And then we put some operational KPIs behind that and a number of different strategies. The benefit of this is it showed public commitment to employees that we were serious about it. The third thing we did is we got the kind of influential people around the business to do a kind of work action plan. And this was really powerful. So we got a guy called Andy Mack, who ran the Colchester branch, some of the people from the front line, who we knew would get kind of excited about it, because what we were worried about is people said, oh, yeah, yet another beep, beep, beep initiative from HQ. So we said, okay, well, let's get all the staff involved in coming up with an action plan, and that's what we created. And then fourthly, we realised that we didn't have an HR director or even a marketing director on the board. We needed external support. So we then went out to some HR consultants who've done an awesome job, actually, called SVR. And so what they did is they really worked on our internal comms. They created a whole series of training workshops to address this issue. And it's going really, really well. I don't think we haven't got all the way there. It's only been a year or two, but the sense is employee morale's right back up. So it was quite a journey. It took a bit of effort, but it really sort of showed success. So, at the moment, what we did is we publicised success pretty early on. So, Ron, the commercial director, was really good at this. So we identified that our timber department, people didn't really rate the quality of our timber, and we fixed that, got a new supplier, timber sales went up 125%. We also started getting nice feedback from our clients, and we publicised that internally. And just looking back at the year, so and the impact this has had, 2013, the board was dominated by operations and finance issues. We had enormous finance reports, nothing on HR and customer, to be honest. We were loss making to the extent that the bank was talking to us, and we could tell that morale was declining. 2014, clearly we've benefited from a bounce back in the economy, but also there's been quite a big culture change in the business. So HR and customer issues are represented on the board. We talk about it on every board meeting. We're back into profit, and significantly back into profit. We're back into expansion mode. We're opening some new branches, and we're fixing the morale and communications issues. We're not totally there. So what have I learned over this journey? I think I definitely believe in staff survey integrated with customer survey. It worked really, really well, and I think you do need to align the questions so you can see that causation. I would also recommend integrating financial data, because that shows the profit chain, if you like. It shows that last bit. It's all very nice being nice to employees and customers, but does it result in profitability? And that's important for your business case. The customer charter worked really well also, and celebrating the small wins. Thing where we struggled a bit was it does take time to get commitment from the board. It's taken a couple of years actually, and we also need to show that we're committed to the staff as well. This is not just some initiative, that we're actually taking on board some of the issues, and it's about maintaining momentum. So keep chipping away, but it does take time. So our journey's taken 2 years. So yeah, that's our journey, I think. And just to summarise, I say, look, definitely worthwhile. Research piece is not that difficult to do. It does need to be aligned. I think where you need to put the effort in is around maintaining momentum. But when you get to that journey, it does make a big difference. Thanks so much. We'll open it now to Q&A.
Great, thanks very much, Ben. A couple of points to raise before we launch into some questions. Nice comment coming through from someone now who says, good to see HR issues represented on the board. I agree, and I would also extend that to say people issues, and I think this is really where this case study comes into its own. This is about ensuring that the board are talking about people and talking about how to add value with people and how to trace the performance of people from employees through to customers. And then, as I mentioned earlier to Dan, who said profitable employees, bit controversial, profit is an outcome in this. So we see that, if you have happy employees at a very basic level, if you have happy employees, you have happy customers, and that will lead to more profit, as we can see from that email from one of your customers. Ben, one thing I really found interesting, and that came through in the comments, was someone who said, really interesting that it was the employee survey that flagged this. I think that's very, very pertinent, that these types of issues with customers can actually come out of the employee survey as well. And it's not that surprising when you think about it, that if you survey your employees and say the internal communication's a problem, that there are then problems with delivery of service to your customers as well. So you can learn a lot from your employee survey, and I do wonder how many companies actually make that jump to the customer as well from the employee survey. Very, very interesting, very interesting. Jay, there's a comment from Jane, who says, how can you see the early warning signs? Jane, can you just elaborate a bit more on that, just what you mean by the early warning signs and when, and then we'll put that question to either Ben or Paul as we get further along. But Paul, I will start with you with a question, and we talked about this earlier. briefly, but I just want to ask how the thinking on customer experience has changed, because it's really taking a brand new look at what makes up a customer, and how those customers are connected to employees, even though we've known about the importance of people for a long time, thousands of years. But how is this shift different?
Okay, I think there's shifts on both sides, Jamie. And I think it's I think I'd say on both sides really. Yeah. So on the customer side of it, there's a degree of maturity, I think, where organisations are changing and moving on from these what have been very sort of strongly pushed benchmarks and formulaic approaches like NPS or CSAT or whatever it is, into things that are more business driven, so more outcome driven on sales and profitability and so on. I mean, there's some outliers that I can give you as an example. My favourite of our customers is actually Rovio, who are the guys who make Angry Birds game, and they're a bunch of guys writing mobile games who've gone from 0 into 100% brand recognition in no time, and they've done that purely by turning the business model round. They engage with customers, they treat customers as fans, they talk to them all the time, and they ask them what they think the business should do next, and that drives product strategy. So it's almost CRM the other way round. You develop loyalty, then you develop the product, rather than the other way round. And that's taking them to some amazing places. They're actually, you probably may not know, but they're actually the biggest soft drinks retailer in Finland now. They outsell Coca-Cola, and that was purely driven by customer input. So there's a lot of change that side. But I think as importantly, if not more so, there's the same sea change happening in employee engagement and people moving away from the annual survey and the sort of formulaic, whatever it may be, 12 questions, 20 questions, benchmark approach, into something which is much more agile and granular and linked to the business. Great example of our customers this year was Royal Sun Alliance, who completely changed their approach to one which was away from the benchmarks and the standard survey into something that's much more about dialogue with employees, qualitative, open questions, regular interaction, town hall meetings, shout outs where people can make suggestions in a much easier way, and they get moved up the levels quickly. And that kind of approach needs a different way of looking at engagement, but it's much closer to the business and allows you to really bring out these kinds of benefits that are there. We just don't see them.
I like your point about impact a lot, and I know you gave an example. That's a really good one. One example that I think are really turning in this way is Waitrose, because they, to me, are moving towards treating customers as people who can input, who are fans, you know, with their new free tea and coffee, which you go to the restaurant there, you can sit down, you have free tea, you get free newspapers. And I think this is about, as you say, Paul, creating the value from customers and then delivering the product. I think they've really taken an interesting approach, and I think that will only expand as they find new ways to do it in ways that work. We've got a comment coming from Ali, who says, what are the best ways to link engagement and customer data to ensure you get meaningful and actionable results? I'll put this one to you, Ben. I think this is absolutely key because people need to see results, and coming back to the business case, the board need to know that they're going to get results, whatever those results are. So there's the internal comms piece for the Kent Blaxell case study. You know, that was what needed to improve, and that's where the results came in. So Ben, what do you think about that question?
Well, I think what we did is we did the customer survey first, because what that identified is the kind of priority areas and the symptoms, if you like. And then what we did when we did the employee survey, it wasn't a kind of classic engagement survey. We focused very much on, you know, these are the issues which are coming out of the customer survey. You know, what do you think are causing it, and what do you think are good ideas for fixing it? So see what I mean? It goes back to Paul's point, is actually it's got a different approach from this kind of just fairly generic NPS benchmark, which gives you a 4.3, and almost saying, well, actually, no, let's be forensic. Let's to use the analogy, let's be like a doctor. Let's say identify what the symptom is, and then really figure out at quite a granular level where the difficulties are. And I think asking the staff for their help with that, because the other thing which really struck me from doing this survey is employees are really motivated to do a good job if you let them, and they really want to help. They really want to deliver customer. They may get frustrated that the organisation gets in the way, which is why I think linking the customer and the employee engagement is so motivated. The end result is a financial output, but actually it's morale boosting as well.
We've just had a comment come in. Very good point there. Agility and proper dialogue with employees is crucial to a successful business nowadays. Completely agree. People know this now instinctively. People know that people are the most important. Your employees are on the ground. They provide the most useful feedback. I mean, it's gold dust. It's absolutely valuable. And so that's where we need to move towards. And connecting that to the customer is the next stage in the journey. We've had a couple of comments on the same types of lines. One person says, is the customer always right though? And how do I filter possible non-useful customer feedback? Is there a danger of negative impact on the flip side? So how do you deal with customers perhaps with expectations you can't meet when you bring them into your organization? What are the dangers there? Paul, can you have a few thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it does depend on the channel of interaction you have with customers. I mean, and just that last comment really made me think about social media. And yeah, I think there's been a lot of push to use social and community as a way of getting this kind of dialogue going and this richer form of insight, but it can have downsides, and an environment like Facebook can very easily turn into a rant page, which isn't particularly useful for anyone, because there's the nuggets of insight, the really useful bits that are there with people contributing, get washed away by the rants of people who have overly focused on single issues. One approach that I've seen work very well on both the customer and the employee side at solving that is using communities, using online community. But that's and what I mean by that is more of a research community. So an invitation only community where you go to a set of employees or a set of customers, you invite them into a community, you share ideas with them, you ask them for specific questions. You typically do it in a granular, agile way based on who they are and what they do. An example that I really like that uses our technology is with BMW, where they have a very close dialogue with customers and deal with things like the impact of electric cars and how does that affect brand advocacy when the driving experience is different. But it's done within a very community environment, so it's forums, blogs, chat sessions, really open dialogue, but with some quantitative analysis as well, so surveys and polls and those kinds of really quick turnaround questions. But it is in a closed community rather than something which can get dominated and hijacked by people who are very vociferous on single issues. And I think the same model works well with employees. I know Sainsbury's have My Sainsbury's, a number of other companies are starting to use these employee communities in the same way. I was talking to a big retailer the other day who have a community of catalyst, they call them, sort of change catalyst people through the organization, who are really trying to make the changes and evangelists, as you might say, and they have a community for them. So I think that kind of approach can be really, really well. It is a slight walled garden, but it does make it easier to get the insight.
We've just had a comment come in from someone who says that being scared of rants is not an excuse for businesses to ignore social, though. It's there and it isn't going to go away. Now, my argument on this would be that there isn't really any situation that a company can't turn around when they handle it in the right way. And actually, is this a training issue? Is this an employee issue? If you're on Facebook and you have a rant on your company page and then someone from the company gets back and says the only thing that the person can do is call customer service, who aren't going to be open for the next 3 weeks. That to me is a poor handling of the situation. The situation is as it is, and I think as a society we're becoming more accepting of seeing negative feedback, and I say that word negative, but it's really constructive most of the time, or can be constructive. It's a learning for the company, and actually it's a free learning for the company, because they can respond effectively and turn the situation around and gain valuable insights. So Paul, just coming back to you on this point then, is it not a training slash, what's the way that we handle this type of thing internally in the company?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree that it can't be ignored, but I think it's a case of see it for what it is, and in my mind anyway, those kinds of situations, so using like Facebook, it's a customer service issue. It's about that individual person's issue and making sure you support them. And I think businesses do have to recognize that it's now mainstream. It's not new. Social is just another contact channel for customer service in the same way as the phone is, or email, or face-to-face, or web chat, or any of the others. And you have to have a consistent approach to supporting them, so you can't ignore them. They won't go away in the same way that you can't switch the phone lines off and hope that nobody will ring you up with a complaint. You have to support it, but I think it's different to what we're talking about today, in that it's not a great way of getting customer insight. I think it's a great way of delivering customer service, and you can see that with some of the open communities. I mean, one of my favorites is giffgaff, the mobile telephony, the mobile SIM card provider, where that they have all of their customer service delivered through a community, and customers help each other and get incentivized for doing that. So I think social is a great channel for customer service. You just have to be a little bit cautious about how you use it for customer insight. I think it's a slightly different issue.
I agree completely, and let's take the example of on Twitter, the hashtag sort of things that big companies do and invite feedback, and people tend to ruin those a lot. People get on them because they feel strongly about something, and it completely backfires. So it's a public arena, like you say, and perhaps that is best left to customer feedback. Just a quick comment from someone, slightly off sort of tangent, but it's relevant from what we're talking about. Social shouldn't just sit with marketing. Everyone in the business should embrace it. CEO downwards. Completely true. And again, it isn't going away. It is one more thing, perhaps separate to what we're talking about, that companies have to deal with. But it is about the customer, let's face it, and so we need to think about that as well. Ben, I'll come to you for a question now. One of the things you were talking about on one of your final slides was the culture, and how you've pretty much turned that around, really focused on the internal comms piece on this and how that was connected to the culture. Culture tends to take a long time to change. But you seem to have done it quite quickly. Are there any tips that you can give people to speed up the journey of cultural change in this area and just make it run a bit more smoothly? And just linked to that, I don't know if this is a prompt or an extra bit of information, but someone has asked about how much involvement employees have in this process of transforming culture in this area of engagement and the customer experience. Is it very top down, or is it very bottom up?
I think my feeling is that the underlying culture of Kent Blackstone was actually in a pretty good place, and it was just taking a bit of battering during the recession. But I think what I think I learned is that you can't just do it through kind of newsletters and emails. They have a place, but I think what the staff were looking for is recognition from the leadership, and particularly the managing director, that the issues which they've been moaning around for several years were actually going to be addressed. And so what we then did is our MD, Simon, he did a kind of talk, went around he spent much more time out on the branches talking to people, and he gave a presentation about where the firm was going. And that worked really, really well. I think also the second point is involving the staff throughout in terms of finding a solution was really good, and particularly picking off the kind of apostles, if you like, who may not be the most senior people in the business, but people who are looked up to. If you can get them on side and get them involved in doing workshops, then through a kind of the informal network, people say, I really believe that there is going to be change. So, yeah, I think just to conclude, I think it's being a bit smart about it, not being too formal, and plenty of face-to-face.
Thanks very much, Ben. We're slightly running out of time. We do have time for a couple more questions, but I'll just tell Ben and Paul right at the end what I'll do is I'll come back to you for your one practical takeaway that you think people could really use, whether it's a piece of knowledge or a piece of advice or just something that you've learned when people are trying to focus on this journey of connecting, engagement and customer experience. And just it could be a takeaway that they can implement tomorrow, something to think about. Doesn't have to be big, just something practical that they can act on. Before we come back to that, one of the things I want to think about is the customer in this, because people say, Generation Y, they're satisfied in totally different ways nowadays. They're more ethical. They want to do business with good companies. And Paul, I'll just come to you on this. Has the customer changed in what they want, or are we talking about something that they've always needed, which is just good service, good products, delivered well, with no problems, no obstacles for them being able to follow what they need to do?
I think broadly yes. That there are some differences, though, I think, that have come through in recent years, and it's all linked up with predominantly with the generational shift, I think, or maybe it's a technology-driven thing, but for whatever reason, people are much more open to share now, particularly in the UK. I think it's less so in some other countries we operate in, like Germany, but within the UK market, customers share so much now that they share their opinions. They expect to write reviews. They expect to rate things, to give their opinions, and expect to be influenced by and rely on what other people say as well. So I think that's the difference. It's a much more open environment than it was before, and that means that things move quicker. So the speed that you had as a business to make decisions and have a positive impact, you don't have the leeway that you used to have. The iteration cycles for decision makings have to be faster, and I think that's creating a lot of challenges around cycles that have been traditionally in place for things like market research, for employee surveys, customer programs, and it's stressing and fracturing some of those approaches which worked really well 10 or 20 years ago, but just aren't fast enough now to work through. So that's the key change I see.
That's a really interesting point about the speed at how things are happening, and people do expect stuff to go fast now because their personal lives and the tech they use then is so good. We've just had a comment come in from someone who says customers are expected to be influencers in today's society, and I think if you can bring that down to the business level and find a way that allows them to do that in a way that works for your business, that's a pretty strong position to be in, and they do expect that. I think they do expect to shape the world in some way, and shaping the world through where you spend your money is a relatively new concept, but it's a really interesting concept, and it's one that more and more customers are buying into, I think. Okay, guys, I think that pretty much takes us to the end. I'll just come back to Paul and Ben for their practical takeaways. Now, Ben, shall I start with you? Ben, I think you're muted at the moment.
Yes, my takeaway was, yes, do it. It has huge benefits. We've seen it really work for our business. And I think the practical thing I would do is link employee, customer, but also financial data, because that's what, the board tends to talk the language of finance. So if you can show that you can fix some of the customer service issues, you can get the employees to help you identify how to do that, and then translate that into higher revenues or reduced costs, then you'll get board commitment.
And just to add to that, there is data there and research that shows that employee engagement, customer experience do lead to greater profit. And if the board's interested in that, those can be pulled out. For example, the Towers Watson study, 26% higher profit per employee if you have an employee engagement culture. It's very hard to argue with those types of stats. These guys know these types of stats. They know where the research and the stats are coming from. So if you do want any further information, do get in touch with them. Paul, I will come back to you for yours now.
Yeah, I think I'd just make it really simple and say build a bridge. I'm assuming that most of the people on the call today are in the HR side of the business, and just build a bridge. Go and talk to your voice of customer or marketing people. Take the data you've got and say, look guys, can we sit down for a few hours, put our data on the table and see what we can link up, just see what comes out of it. Take an open approach to it, try and break those silos. You'll probably walk out with more questions than answers, but I think it's a start to the dialogue, and you may pick one or two quick wins or bits of nuggets of insight that come out of it, and it may be the start of a more regular dialogue.
And I'm glad you said the word open, because this really is an open, transparent and honest process where you see where you are and where you can be through this building a bridge, and by connecting the employee and the customer as well. Okay, everyone, thank you very much for attending today's HR Zone online event with Questback and Meridian West. That is all we have time for today. Unfortunately, really interesting topic. Could continue talking about this for a long time, but thank you very much to our panelists, Paul and Ben, for joining us today. Thanks everyone for attending. You will receive a copy of the webinar recording, including the audio and the slides, so you can rerun through this in your own time. If you do have any questions after it about the case study or about Paul's presentation, do get in touch with me on editor@hrzone.com, and I can pass any thoughts, any questions onto them and connect you. There's a lot happening in this sphere, a lot of research, a lot of new insight coming out of case studies that give more practical takeaways. So there's a lot of learning, and these guys can help out as well. So thanks very much again for attending, and we hope to see you again soon for an HR Zone online event. Thanks very much. Bye bye.